Good afternoon. Thank you all, and I mean all of you. Wow. Thanks for coming today on a very beautiful Sunday to celebrate with us the opening of Mark Leckey, Containers and Their Drivers, or there's various versions of the title. Can you give us another one?
I haven't had to say it out loud. Containers and drivers.
Very, very nice. Thank you. I'm joined here with my co-curator Stuart Comer from the Department of Media and Performance at MoMA. Many of you probably heard the sound system. To call it a performance is kind of wrong, isn't it?
It's a demonstration.
Demonstrating what?
What they can do.
We didn't really hear what they could do until the very end, did we?
Circuit City demo.
And so what were we hearing?
We heard, actually that's good because I need to give someone a name check in there. One of the tunes was by someone called Infinite Body. Does anyone know Infinite Body? Anyway, one of them was, and you heard a bit of, the organ was Langley, a bit of French organ playing, bit of Little Richard.
Oh, right.
Bit of Richard Hulsenbeck. What else was in there? Bit of John Bonham. That was the drums.
It was John Bonham.
That was John Bonham.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah. And then a bit of Joan Dion. No, Joan Baez doing Amazing Grace at the end. Okay. Not Joan Dion. That would have been
Distant
good.
cousin of Joan Didion, right?
I looked for that on YouTube, but I couldn't find it. Yeah.
And so, how much of that had you figured out before? Did you just ad-lib that?
Yeah. It wasn't very good. You don't have to pretend it was good. I'm quite tired, and that's the best I could ring out. But I thought the Asen. Oh, so at the end, the last track is by Asen. It's called "Trip to the Moon." It's from 1993, and it's, like I said, it's my favourite song ever.
Ever?
Ever, yeah.
Ever.
Ever. Yeah, it's like, that's it. That's my... Whenever I start to make something, I listen to that first, and it kind of... That's what I aspire to, is that song.
Wow.
Yep.
Tell us about moons, because they keep popping up.
Oh, yeah. I'm Cancerian. No, seriously, I am. So I'm affected by the moon. I can know when there's a full moon in my bones, and I guess with this show is more. If you watch Dream English Kid, there's moons throughout the video, and they're all contemporary moons, if that makes sense, contemporaneous moons. So if you see a moon from 1992, that's the footage is from 1992. So you're seeing the moon go through these different stages, different, what's the astrological term for moons?
Phases.
Phases, exactly. You're seeing it go through technological phases as well as...
And you were born in '64, the same year that there was a major total lunar eclipse, and the same year that NASA first launched the Satelloons, which you see in the large gallery on the third floor with the yellow sodium lights.
That's right.
So maybe could you talk a bit about your obsession with the Satelloon?
I found this out from Greg Allen. I don't know if Greg's here. I don't know if Greg turned up at all. Did he come? Does anyone know Greg Allen?
Greg.org.
Greg.org. So the big silver Satelloon you see in the building room is by Greg. So I stole a lot of this off Greg, basically. But in 1964, NASA experimented with these giant mylar balloons, 100-foot diameter balloons that were shot into space in order to bounce signals back down to Earth. And they were called Echo 1 and Echo 2. And I just thought, well, that's when it all begins. I mean, basically, the show, and especially Dream English Kid, is about how I've been affected by signals, how I've kind of ingested all those broadcasts and what it's done to my brain.
So then is Felix the cat sort of your avatar?
There we go, that's very neat. So if you look in the long tail room, there's a little there's a little photograph of a Felix the Cat doll sitting on a turntable, surrounded by all this kind of weird machinery. And it is from 1929, and it's basically the very first image ever broadcast on television. So they were testing out a broadcast in New York, and they put a doll of Felix on a turntable and broadcast it out on these tiny little TVs to kind of like ham radio. Did you call it ham radio over here? Yeah, little ham. So they'd have little TVs, and so it's the very first electronic signal ever kind of beamed out. And so for me, that's the beginning of everything.
So there are probably about like 30 people in this room broadcasting images of you right now on Instagram.
Yeah, there you go. That's what happens.
And so, so maybe talk a little bit about these sort of man machines or machine men or anthropomorphic objects that are all over the place in this show.
That's a harder one. I guess. All right. Well, for one, that Asen track. What I love about rave and what I loved about what I love about music in general, but it's kind of clearer with rave and techno, especially techno, is that mechanical, machine-made music. It's very rigid and very reductive, and yet does these incredible things to your body and your mind, and allows you to achieve something that's almost spiritual, or in some way divine, even. So it's I don't know. I can never quite grasp that produces that a machine produces that effect, and then the other side is a kind of anxiety which goes the other way about just becoming generally more machine-like, becoming more cyborg,
It was kind of amazing that on Friday night, as we were kind of finishing the exhibition, we read the news, those of us who could access it, about the basically crash of the internet, driven in part by an attack that employed smart machines, in people's homes. And to walk into the Samsung refrigerator room, which is this ventriloquism in some way of a smart object that's been imbued with a life and a mind outside of itself. It just seemed that piece was, I don't know, it's boring to always say artists are before their time in some ways, but that piece seems to have anticipated or at least been part of a wave of cultural anxiety about machines. Not in an AI kind of Westworld way, but just in a, I don't know, there's a lot of anxiety, I think, in the show also that I didn't expect. And green screen, I've seen it a number of times now, to me suddenly feels much more anxious than it ever has. I don't know if is that just me?
No, I think it's all a bit anxious, I'm quite twitchy about everything. I mean, it's, I feel divided between a kind of between a kind of excitement at the potential of these things, and an anxiety about what it's going to cost us. I mean, I think we're being transformed by it, by technology. We always are. We're technological creatures. We're always being transformed, but we're in a moment of extreme amplification of that kind of transformation, I think. And as Marshall McLuhan said, we have to amputate things in order to kind of adapt to these new ways. And I think that's what's happening now. We're being amputated and growing into whatever potential that's going to offer us.
Which makes me think a little bit about phantom limbs and mirror therapy,
Yeah.
you know, and especially when you get to universal addressability of dumb things and that sort of work where you're dealing with, you know, copies of copies of copies, scans of data of objects, and there are all these different generations of transmutation going on. But then there are also so many mirrors in the show, from the Jeff Koons bunny to the saddle loon, and they're, you know, they're not just conventional mirrors either. They're like skin, they're membranes, and so it's, you know, somewhere between the mirror, the body without organs, that's being 3D printed.
I've never understood what that means.
I'm not going to go into Deleuze right now.
No, seriously, I've
yeah.
wrestled with that for about 15 years, and I still don't understand what it is. So if someone can come up and explain to me later precisely what body without organs actually fucking means, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
I think the saddle loon might be
That's
it.
one of them.
Maybe,
Okay.
or the Koons bunny.
Okay.
But, you know, somewhere between the mirror and the phantom limb and these sort of cadavers that are being reanimated in the show, there's something interesting going on. But again, it's sort of like Felix being your avatar. You're always implicated in these things in some way, because maybe because of all the mirrors.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's two reasons I think to do that. One is that I make things in order to look at them. So that's kind of like a mirror, right? You set up something in order to see it. Like, for example, like the Koons bunny. That's not, you know, I'm not attempting to talk about Koons' rabbit. I love that rabbit. I adore that object, and I wanted to have it in my flat so I could worship it, I guess, in some way. Or just look, or just be able to reflect on it again and again, because I like loops.
So which brings us back to the original Big Box statue action, which was a precursor for the performance today, or non-performance. But maybe could you talk about the trajectory of the Big Box events? Because they've each been quite distinct.
Yeah. So it starts off with I made a record. I used to live in Soho in London, which is central part of London. I used to have a little flat there, Windmill Street, and I made a record about Soho. Sort of, I'd go out and make field recordings. I'd go out and record people vomiting in the streets, because that's what they do in Soho. And then mix it with evocative music that evoked particular places within Soho. Anyway, it ended up as a record, and I got it pressed onto a dub plate, and then it was called Dub Plate. And I didn't have anything to play it on in a gallery, so a dub plate equals a sound system, so I made a sound system. So that was the first sound system. And then after that, I got invited by a curator at Tate called Catherine Wood to do a performance, to select an art object and perform with it. This is going to get quite long. Anyways, there's a massive Jacob Epstein sculpture, huge, big, ugly Bruce of a thing that has been around the Tate for years, and I've always seen it, and they're always moving it about because they don't know what to do with it. And I've never grasped what it is or what it was or why it was made, but kind of was fascinated by it. And so the idea was to get the sound system to ask it what it was. So that was Big Box. Big Box is the sound system, statue, and then there's an action in the same way as the Viennese actionists, except there was no nudity, except Jacob and the angel were.
No bloodshed.
And no bloodshed, no fluids, and that was how it began. Yeah.
Because I mean, what are the other objects you've kind of had this interface between Henry Moore, Jacob Epstein?
All right. So at the end of it, there's two things I got out of it. One is that what it actually was a form of art appreciation. Yeah. In order to really appreciate an art object, you have to create this kind of ritual around it in order to kind of really know it. So that was one thing. And the other thing was that I realized that to experience anything, that I can't it's ineffective to address it directly, that the more you kind of mediate towards it, the more you go through some other device, the more it amplifies the resonance of that thing. And then you get that effect that you want. Then it starts to speak and it starts to do things to you. You know, but only then. I can't go and stand in front of that sculpture and expect to be awestruck by it, because there's just too much shit in the way, you know. It's too heavy. So, but if I go round it, I kind of avoid all that heaviness, all that history, all that kind of modernism and all the rest of it.
I think that decoy approach, which
Yeah.
is something that's very much part of how I also think about my own work as a curator. It's in a way that I've never really encountered before working with another artist. It really is the structure of at least this entire exhibition, where, you know, at each moment where we try to put a stake down in the ground in some fashion to sort of like fix the work of art. You know, you move it into something else. Like, okay, it was shown this way, let's show it this way this time, or let's show it that way this time, or let's run the sound from that through these speakers over here. But then I want this film to fight this other film, and cut it. Like, most people here today probably don't know this, but there was at one point, well, you can explain it actually in Demons, the kind of the one piece attacking another piece, because I thought that was kind of brilliant and also difficult to figure out.
There's a piece upstairs that's got a kind of hippie ghost film in it called Out Demons Out, and there's an older piece called We're Untitled, which I made in my flat, this same flat I keep referencing, and you know, now you work with, you know, that comes about because of show control, bright sign. Don't know if anyone knows this stuff, but it allows you to kind of switch things on and off. And is a really useful. Basically, it means you don't have to end up with a video in a black box, which a couple of times we did, but not really. And so this allowed me to kind of just mix the two together, I guess, to jam one with the other one, because it's a kind of, you know, I don't want these things to just be fixed. I find that quite dull, and also it doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem correct in this age that things belong to a particular medium or a particular support. You know, they're restless, they're promiscuous, and they move around, and they want, you know, we're surrounded by images, and they're all like specters, just restless ghosts looking for somewhere to kind of fix themselves to, impermanently.
I think that's what's so remarkable about organizing a show like this, which is the biggest collection of your work really exhibited to date, is that it somehow still keeps moving around among these different forms. And at the end of the day, even though there's a huge amount of work and space involved, there's still a kind of, you know, series of deflections and deferrals, you know, and signals sort of bouncing from one thing to the next, or as Stuart mentioned, kind of reflecting from different mirrored objects. And yet all of that frantic, you know, movement away somehow ends up giving us a very good idea somehow of who you are as an artist.
Yeah, I mean, now it's hard to say because I'm sitting here on this stage and I'm right in the middle of all these lights and everything, but I don't want to be caught. I'm trying to avoid being caught. I mean, now I'm caught, I'm captured, but I'm always trying to avoid it. I mean, I grew up, throughout the show you'll see, like in Fiorucci Made Me Hardcore, there's a scene with the casuals, right? And the casuals were this movement, not a movement, I don't know what you call them, a subculture, in the UK in the late 70s, early 80s, which was basically about kids who went to football matches, who up to then had been skinheads and easily identifiable as troublemakers, realizing that they were being, you know, the police were kind of too aware of them. So part of not this isn't the entire reason, but part of the reason for partly that reason, they started wearing clothes that would be more beguiling, be more confusing to the police. So they ended up wearing a lot of very early kind of sports gear and golf gear. So you basically have these massive lads all dressed like golfers attending a football match, and that would confuse and beguile the police and everyone else. So it's that, and I always loved that. I always thought that is the way to operate through your life, is like, don't get fucking caught, don't get known, don't let the bastards know you, you know what I mean? And
So you'd prefer
although
to be...
that sounds wrong now. I was getting into my old mindset. Now I'm, well, now that gets awkward.
But
now.
it's better to be confused for Johnny Depp from Pirates of the Caribbean in an airport than an artist, I suppose, right?
Yeah, what are you saying?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No. There's that amazing footage in Fiorucci Made Me Hardcore of casuals, kind of gangs of them, packs of them wandering the streets. I assume it's Liverpool, and it looks like CCTV footage or something. But I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you compile that material to make Fiorucci, and in the relatively short gap of time between that and Pearl Vision, which is obviously not a compilation film. It's made digitally with very different tools in barely the space of a decade. So just could you talk a little bit about that working process, and then also, by the time you get to cinema in the round, you're really negotiating both the virtual world and the world of objects, like tangible, real, physical objects. And I think ever since Cinema in the Round, your work has been taking that forward. So ironically, you begin with Fiorucci, which is like waiting for months at a time to get objects, which are VHS tapes, to be able to splice these things together. And then only a few years later, YouTube is everywhere, and you're able to kind of start being a bricoler online.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit more about how you made Fiorucci and what do you think it stands for now, many, many years later?
So I started making it in 1997, and it finished in 99. So I had lots of time. I didn't have any, I hadn't made anything up to then. I made a couple of little things, but not really. Because I was I left art school quite disillusioned with art. Not disillusioned, confused. I was confused by essentially the amount of critical theory I was expected to kind of take on board and to process, and I couldn't. I left college feeling stupid, essentially. So I didn't make anything for a long time, and then I had an opportunity to make I was asked if I'd be part of this show about video. And so this is going to get boring. I'll try and make it quick. So it started off, it was going to be all the best moments ever broadcast of kind of pop and rock and roll and music. So like that classic, everything now that's on YouTube. So like the classic one like Iggy Pop walking out, covering himself in peanut butter and glitter, all that kind of footage. And I tried to make it, and it didn't work. It was just quite dull, and there was a lot of talking head kind of documentaries about music and subculture and sort of very kind of boomer led. And I didn't want to make that, and that's the way it was going. So I decided that I had to make it more about things that I'd had an experience of, and that's essentially what Fiorucci is. It's kind of my history of dance culture, of subcultures in the UK. And to do that, I would have to, write letters to people, requesting, asking if they had VHS tapes of that particular period. And either I got lucky or I didn't get lucky, and then I would wait, and these things would come in the post, and I'd treat these things very reverently because they were so rare and precious. And in that, it became more about video than it came about the subculture. Or equally, it kind of was between the two. So it became more and more about the technology and the effect of video and what it produced in me, the kind of grain of it. And it seemed like the poorer the quality, the more excited I was by it, the more it stimulated me. So it became, then that began a kind of, I don't know, just an interest in like why those things do what they do to me, which is what kind of all of it's about really. Why are they so effective? Why am I so affected by this stuff, whether it's Coons' Rabbit or the weird grain and VHS.
And how did you structure the music? Were you responding to the images, or how did you edit sound and image for it?
Yeah, it's like very slow response. Yeah, I mean, there's some I found the other day some very bad attempts. I'd made a sort of sing-song narrative where I basically sound like I'm rapping, which I'm glad I didn't go down that road. So it was meant to have my voice in, but more and more I pulled my voice out. You can hear one bit of me. What I used to do was get very drunk. Well, I'd be drunk and I'd edit drunk. And you can hear one bit when I'm very drunk and just slurring and kind of, I think I'm almost weeping with nostalgia. And I kept that in. But it's quite knocked back in the mix. It was a very melancholic, sad.
This is the most deeply romantic show you will see in New York this year.
Yeah.
But could you, because now it circulates, Fiorucci circulates broadly on YouTube. It's it's a landmark, iconic film for a lot of people, and it's influenced the fashion industry. It's influenced a lot of young artists. But to bring it kind of back into the gallery and give it this physical sound, I think has really shifted, for me, the experience of it back to another place. And maybe it would be good if you and Peter could talk a little bit about the speakers and just what they represent in terms of certain kinds of subcultures that are disappearing.
Yeah. Well, we had an amazing bit of fortune. Jim Toff, who's over there. Big shout to Jim. Thank you for everything. So Jim knows a guy called Paul, whose surname I don't know.
Paul Brown. I don't know if Paul's here.
He's right here,
Where is
Paul.
he?
Sorry, Paul. I never learned your surname. So Paul used to build sound systems with Richard Long, who did the sound systems for Studio 54 and Paradise Garage and all these mythical places to me growing up with dance culture that were like, these were the kind of sites of pilgrimages, of sacred spaces of sound. And so when we found out that Paul had a couple of these speakers, then we did everything we could. And Paul was very generous in allowing us to borrow these speakers. So they're connected back to Studio 4. There's a lineage there, I think, which makes them quite even more totemic. I think.
Because the title is a Studio 54.
That's right. Because I got that title, Fiorucci made me hardcore. So Fiorucci was a brand, Italian brand that was big in New York and a bit in the UK in the late 70s. And when I was a kid, when I was a casual, that was the label that you really wanted, was Fiorucci.
You were the one not wearing the golf outfit then. Basically.
Well, they had different. Golf was just one particular period. They had lots of different. One particularly good casual look was looking like a geography teacher. That was with patches on your arms and fake glasses. That was
a bit like Stuart, actually.
Yeah, a bit like that. Yeah, like that. So.
Forgot my horn rim glasses at home.
So it moved around a lot, but one of the periods was Fiorucci, and then I went to this Warhol exhibition a long time ago, and they had a picture of Studio 54, and written outside there was a bit of graffiti that said Fiorucci made me hardcore, and I was just like, fuck, that's good. It's good. It's good in a number of ways, but it's good, especially good because it's something. I'm struggling now if I still believe it, but I did believe it for a long time, which is the idea that what I loved about subculture was the idea that you would take something that's essentially trivial and kind of trite and transient, like a record, like a jeans label that's just fashion, and then you would make it hardcore. You would make it. You would would basically invest a faith in this thing. You would commit to this thing, you know, this thing that was just fleeting. You would commit to it, and that kind of creates an energy. That creates an amazing energy. I think a kind of belief in something that's actually quite that asks nothing of you except to exploit you in some ways. You know?
Well, it's funny. It's the exact opposite of how you work with your work. In a way, instead of making something fleeting very hardcore, you make something that's very hardcore into something very fleeting.
That's cool.
It's kind of true.
Oh, that's nice.
I mean, on the speaker point, I mean, another thing is there are a set of speakers that Syd Barrett made for himself that he had, which you somehow got your hands on and are running sound through. I mean, it's interesting to think about the way that sound and the boxes that receive and pass on the signals actually become kind of the totemic objects and the underlying structure for the show, whether it's the Syd Barrett speakers, whether it's Paul Brown's speakers, which themselves are, you know, continuing a signal from Richard Long and from an earlier, much broader, gigantic social experience that was those clubs. All the way up to just like, you know, whatever speakers we have in the basement that we're using to run sound for one of the other pieces. That it was interesting to work on a show where so much of the object so much of the spirit of the show literally was contained within sound objects, not within in physical forms.
Yeah.
But
Maybe no. I'd go on. No, but
I mean, the fridge is that. The fridge, bizarrely, is a speaker.
Well, it's because it's about. I think it's that investment, isn't it? It's an investment in something, and also it's about a kind of what's it called? Panpsychism, right? It's about a kind of animism, right? That these things in themselves have some quality that is theirs in particular. That, you know, they have a quiddity, a kind of, you know, they're magic. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm fussing around the word, but they're magic. They have some kind of magical presence, you know, and I'm trying to access that magic. Yes.
But I think, I mean, just in terms of, and then I'll stop on the speakers, but I mean, you know, Richard Long's speakers were designed to drive the sound into your body. I mean, it was a totally different, very physical experience of sound. And I'm just thinking about a number of artists that are now sort of associated with you, sort of younger artists whose work is definitely in dialogue with some of the work you've produced. And I'm thinking Ed Atkins, James Richards, Rachel Rose, and all of them, I think, are dealing with trying to find some sense of touch or a haptic physical quality in a very digital and virtual world. And so, again, it's back to liquidity. It's just these endlessly liquid streams of glossy, seamless images, and they're somehow trying to find ways to rupture that or find a place in that for themselves. But in your work, I think there's a similar operation, but then it is more emphatically analog because, you know, you are coming from an analog world into a digital world. You're old. We're all old. But no, I think it's and again, we talked a little bit the other day about, you know, affinities also with a much earlier generation of British artists like Richard Hamilton and Paolozzi. But there is something of the kind of the clunky automaton, the clunky android, and then there are things that are very high tech, like Pearl Vision, for instance. Yeah. So where do you sort of locate yourself within, you know, these different generations of technology at this point?
I think it's like you say, it's something to do with touch. It's something to do with, you know, the illusion of that technology produces is so convincing, is so hyper real, is so, you know, has such verisimilitude that you believe that you can touch these things. You know, they feel tangible, they feel in the world as much as these speakers are in the world. I believe that, you know, things generated on my laptop or on my phone are as real. I find it hard not to convince myself of that, or to try and convince myself otherwise. It just feels like my body's confused by them. My body's confused by the reality of things, you know. And so it's trying to figure out what tangibility, what materiality is, you know, with this stuff. Pearl Vision's about that, just trying to trying to touch a drum, trying to feel it, trying to know it, and trying to kind of absorb it, and become it. You end up. It's like a feedback loop, and you're part drum, you're part you.
You're dissolving into it.
Yeah, and you're dissolving into it, and you're just allowing yourself to, like you said, become kind of more liquid in some ways, and just surrender. I mean, the thing about Pearl Vision is it's just that. It's just sort of surrendering myself to like that desire of just succumbing to that kind of gloss, that shine, that kind of looks, Just, I'll just go with it rather than resisting it. It's just.
What's your favorite part of this show?
What's my favorite? I think green screen came off really well. I like that a lot. I like the little mini green screen that's on a phone. I'm quite delighted with that every time I go in.
Of course, he says the week that Samsung phones are blowing up. But
it's not. I mean, it all looks. I mean, this is where I should sort of gush a little bit, probably, and say how fantastic it is and how amazing everyone has been at PS1. And a big thanks to everyone, all the people who worked their arse off getting it made. You were great. You were all fantastic. I'm not going to say your names because I will start to cry. But it's been fantastic. It's been lovely.
Thanks. Maybe people have questions?
Yeah.
I don't know. Do we have microphones? Anyway? We can't see you is the only issue. So let's see. If anyone has a question, try to get your hands on a microphone. Let's see.
Can you talk a little bit about the bridge on the third floor?
Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you. This is Oliver, who's one of the people that I should have thanked by name, standing next to Jocelyn. Thank you, Oliver and Jocelyn. You were brilliant. So the bridge is, it's put me on the spot. So the bridge is a real bridge. It's a bridge that existed when I was a kid. When I was about 8 years old, we used to go and. I say 8. All of this is very dubious, but my memory of it is that we used to go and sit in the kind of niche in the kind of alcove at the top of that bridge, and like eat sweets or be naughty. I don't think we smoked at that young. I can't remember smoking, but I remember being up there, and this has got nothing to do with the show, but there's something about that bridge that is, it's like all right, well, this is the reason, what's the best way to put this? A lot of the show is about things that have kind of solidified in my psyche, right? And one of the things that's kind of solidified, that is feels like it's just, I carry it with me, is that bridge. It moves. Everywhere I move, it goes with me. And one of the reasons it moves with me is because I thought I saw a pixie underneath that bridge. And I was convinced until later life that I did. So there was some kind of spirit under that bridge that it was like I say a pixie because it had a hat with a little bell on and those... And kind of mocking me in the way that it knew that it looked like a pixie that was ridiculous. I've subsequently found out that this is not uncommon for people to see pixies like this. So if anyone has any pixie sightings they'd like to share with me later, that would be fantastic, so I don't feel like a total tit. It's that room is about things that have just... It's about the weight of things in my... It's back to what we were talking about that tangibility and material. That's a thing that I carry around. And just to make it one-to-one just seemed... it's also like I treat these shows in some ways as like an exorcism. It's a way of just getting that stuff out of my head into the physical realm so I can just... see it and well, I mean, like the drive is to exercise it, to cast it out, but it never works. That's always kind of ineffective. These things never, it never resolves anything. But that's the kind of drive to do it, is to just get it the fuck out of my head. Or it's more than in my head. It's in my, it's in my being, to get it out of my being.
But the bridge is also a speaker.
And, the bridge is also a speaker. So the bridge has got a big horn in the back, and it's making sound.
What's playing through it?
Again, a bit of infinite body. I need to get in touch with this guy and say that I'm using all his stuff. And odds and sods, some weird, I like everyone here, probably I have hard drives of just stuff that I accumulate. And I'll just sit with the bridge and just go through it and see what works. So there's all sorts of stuff. There's my mum in there. There's my mum calling my name at one point. There's this weird... There's Ian Curtis from Joy Division undergoing hypnotherapy by Bernie Sumners, the singer of New Order. So there's that. There's just weird... Just bits, odds and sods, occluded weirdness.
Is there another question? Oh, there's one.
Forgive me if I ramble a bit, but unfortunately we missed the performance. My friend and I came late, but I do want to thank you because the technology has changed us tremendously. So the phone has changed us, has changed our attention span tremendously. So, and we only got to see the one floor so far, and then we've come down to hear you talk. But the idea of an immersive space, you created a space where it's not just like, a few paintings on the wall and then my attention kind of wanders and I get bored like a 5-year-old, literally, and I walk out. You created a space for us to enter in this kind of fantasy world. I have no idea what you meant by it or what it's all about, but immediately, and we saw some kids meander and just kind of were like fascinated and touched and sat and listened. And so I'd love to hear you talk a tiny bit about that, about how you create, or what are the thoughts about creating this immersive, kind of wonder world for us. The black room with the sort of the primordial figures, and my friend mentioned that she thought it was like the Met.
So really what?
What?
Oh, it's like the Met.
Yeah, it's like the Met.
It's like a cheap version of the Met.
Yeah,
Not
but
that
it was
cheap,
like
sorry.
whimsical and fun. But the one thing I have to say, and I really bow down to you, is that you have a wonderful, playful approach to it all. It all looks a bit silly, and I'm sure there's a level of seriousness underneath that I wouldn't know about it. But
it's called cheese.
Fine.
Cheese.
We
I like
thank you
cheesy.
for it. It was wonderful. Oh, that's the one other thing I want to compliment you is that a lot of, and I know a few sophisticated artists, and it seems like we all work on the same idea. And some of us have worked on the same idea for decades.
Okay.
Right? And then when I looked at your work, my visceral kind of reaction was like, wow, you're thinking about a lot of stuff and you're playing with a lot of stuff and a lot of mediums and you've effectively combined them. So I'm sure there's a few questions in there
Okay. No, the one.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. No, it's
That was
great.
fun.
It's nice to hear. Thank you very much. Yeah, the idea of look, there's two reasons, I think. One is, if you make video, then you're trying to escape the idea of a black box, right? You're trying to escape like a black box that you go into and sit and watch your videos. That's one reason to kind of expand. You know, I think if you're making video, if you're making digital work, you've basically got a problem where a 21st century technology is trying to be grafted onto a 19th century environment, right? So you have to wrestle with that. You have to find a way of making the exhibition become a medium in itself, as someone else has said, But second, more importantly, it's more, I want it to be psychedelic, you know. I want you to, I mean, that's why all those sodium lamps, you haven't seen them yet, they're upstairs. That's to fuck your head up. So when you go around the show, it's like it's altered your state, your way of kind of being, you know. The reason to use like the sodium lights, like getting back to what Oliver asked about the bridge is they were always, when we used to take magic mushrooms, that was how you knew you were coming up. Everything could go very yellow, right? You'd know you were coming up on mushrooms, and that was the point where you knew you were going to enter into this other state, this other kind of psychedelic adventure trip. So it's that. I want you to have a trip, man, you know. It's like I'm trying to make art as much like music as I possibly can. I want, you know, and when you listen to music, it affects you immediately, right? You're just in the music, and it's surrounding you, and you're absorbed in it, and you're gone. And that's what I'm trying to attain in making work. It's like you just go into this space, and you don't have to, you know, you don't have to unpack what it's about. You don't have to decode it. It's just like, fuck, this is doing something to my head and my body, and I'll go with it, hopefully. So it's that kind of, you know, it's not for thinking. It is a bit stupid. And cheesy is a really good concept. I like cheesiness. If anyone was in the performance, that Asen track is very cheesy, but I fucking adore it. And I was talking to you the other day about this. This is, what's her name? Carol Bove said this about cheesiness. And what was the other one I said? Tacky. She made this really good distinction between cheesy and tacky, which is like, tacky is when something aspires to be glamorous or kind of, you know, seductive. But cheese just accepts its nature, you know, how cruddy and crap it is. So I'm all for that.
The theorist Larry Rickles once told me that cheese is camp for straight people.
There you go.
But I just wanted to quickly follow up too, because I was talking with Oliver, who worked with us on this show as well last night, about Paul Tech, and in particular, he's writing his dissertation on Tech, and partly inspired by Mike Kelly's essay on Paul Tech. And you know, Mike was an artist who would, you know, reference Iggy Pop and the Cockettes as much as he would Adorno, right? And so he was sort of avoiding the usual art historical cliches and pitfalls. And we've talked a lot about, you know, recent shows here at MoMA and MoMA PS1, Bruce Conner, Mike Kelly, et cetera. And these are artists I think you have a really strong affinity with, partly because you're a polymath, you work so fluidly across a lot of mediums, you sample and appropriate, but also because, you know, you actively engage with countercultural approaches. And it's those approaches that art history really denied from its official narratives for a long time. Slowly, some of it's being reclaimed a bit. But to what extent, and I mean, again, this gets us a little bit back to the idea of, can an underground or a counterculture continue to exist in the age of the internet? Should it? I mean, there are obviously all kinds of global protest movements and other, you know, hacktivist approaches, but particularly thinking back to Fiorucci as a sort of core nucleus in your whole practice, how much do you still believe in the potential of the underground, or do you think it still has any agency?
I mean, my only answer to, look, I just think the counterculture I grew up with, the subcultures I grew up with, were generated post-war. You know, there was a baby boom, there was a pop, a rock and roll, explosion of rock and roll, whatever. Little Richard, all that initial energy, and it was a big bang, and then, you know, it reaches a stage of entropy. You know, it cools. But that was all about a particular set of conditions. It was about technology that was available to them then, that was generating it. And I think whatever those conditions are may be lost, but they're being replaced by something. I mean, I don't want this to sound too glib, but I think to make work now in the white heat of this kind of technology is fucking thrilling. You know, it's like, what the fuck is going on? I don't know, but that seems the best place to make work from, you know, rather than it's not, you know, it's not static, that's for sure, you know. And So that's what you have to engage in. You have to figure this stuff out as waves of it kind of come in and seem to just erase everything you've ever known. You know.
Maybe that's a good place to stop. I want to thank everyone for coming. There are some, for those interested, Mark assigned some books which are available over here. Please also make sure to see Sasha Brauning's great show on the first floor and also Cynthia Marcel's project show in the Duplex Gallery. Thanks.